Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's jump right into a really fascinating shift that's happening across the industry right now. The move away from those exhausting, high-energy whiteboard sessions to an entirely new era of async product discovery. Look, if you work in product development, you already know the drill, right? You gather everyone in a room, hand out a million sticky notes, and just cross your fingers that a brilliant idea magically appears before everyone checks out on Friday afternoon. But honestly, as our teams have gotten more distributed, that old way of doing things is totally breaking down. So today, we're looking at how the most effective teams are taking all that chaotic brainstorming and turning it into a structured, highly documented async process. So let's start by challenging the status quo a bit. We really have to ask ourselves, are those grueling 5-day in-person workshops actually producing the absolute best ideas? Or are they kind of just rewarding the loudest voices in the room? The traditional setup assumes that brilliance just strikes in real time, right under pressure. But in reality, it's often more of a theatrical performance than a genuine, deep strategy session. It completely alienates anyone working in a different time zone, and honestly, it leaves your introverted deep thinkers completely in the dust. Here's the roadmap for our explainer today. We'll start with RIP, the 5-day workshop, then cover the async architecture, the video multiplier, designing for introverts, and wrap it all up with the async toolkit. Let's get right into it. Section 1, RIP the 5-day workshop and the async shift. According to research from Whiteboard, wasting time on low-value discovery is actually the #1 driver of roadmap misalignment. It creates this huge void that we call the discovery-delivery gap. Think about it. When your entire discovery process happens in a fleeting Zoom call, the crucial why behind your product decisions just vanishes into thin air the second everybody hits leave meeting. And without a permanent record, you end up handing over these half-baked requirements to your developers, completely stripped of any historical context. It's a recipe for disaster. Just look at the direct contrast here. It's basically night and day. The traditional sync workshop is super fleeting, totally restricted by time zones, and inherently favors the most charismatic person in the room. But the async discovery sprint? That prioritizes writing over talking. It is fully documented, completely time zone agnostic, and it creates this persistent, searchable anchor for every single strategic pivot your team makes. Moving right along to Section 2, async architecture, and why we're focusing on phases over days. So instead of stressing out over 5 specific days of back-to-back Zoom calls, an async sprint operates entirely on phases of input. And why does that matter so much? Well, GitLab's 2023 Remote Work Report hit the nail on the head here. This structural shift is absolutely vital because it fundamentally protects the deep work that remote productivity relies on. You basically stop measuring physical presence, and you start measuring actual, thoughtful output. Take a look at this chronological flow. It is honestly amazing because a project moves through this entire async pipeline without a single mandatory team meeting. First up, you understand by kicking things off with a central Notion brief and some pre-recorded video context. Second, you ideate through async brainwriting over a 48-hour window using tools like Miro or FigJam. Third, you decide, stepping away from emotional arguments and using strict quantitative voting instead. And finally, you prototype and validate in isolation, pulling in real user feedback through platforms like Dovetail. It's clean, it's rigorous, and it just works. All right, Section 3, the video multiplier, turning clarity into velocity. Now, the secret to successful async discovery isn't just typing up a massive novel every time you have a thought. It's about communicating with extreme density. By taking a rambling 60-minute status meeting and condensing it down into a punchy 3-minute high-context video walkthrough, your team unlocks massive strategic velocity. This right here is what we call the multiplier effect. And this brings us to a somewhat harsh but entirely necessary truth. Embracing this 3-minute constraint forces product managers to get absolutely precise before they waste anyone else's time. Honestly, if you find yourself rambling in a recording, you have to stop, scrap it, and go back to the drawing board to clarify your own thinking. The format literally forces discipline. Okay, let's look at the real, tangible benefits for the folks on the receiving end of this video multiplier. Stakeholders aren't held hostage to a speaker's real-time pacing anymore. They can consume insights at 1.5x speed if they want. They can drop in precise time-stamped comments, so context is never, ever lost. And best of all, they can revisit the rationale weeks later when a developer inevitably asks, wait, why did we decide to build it this way again? The entire memory of the project is securely preserved. Section 4, designing for introverts and dramatically improving inclusivity. Think about it. Traditional brainstorming practically rolls out the red carpet for whoever thinks fastest on their feet or just speaks the loudest, right? We're basically rewarding charisma over actual substance. But by shifting to an async model, we completely change the currency of the room. We are leveling the playing field so that the absolute best idea wins, regardless of how dynamic the pitch was. You're responding to the documented evidence, not the theater. This shift has a massive human impact, too. When you remove that intense pressure cooker of a live room, you empower the people who just need a second to process. Introverts and definitely non-native speakers who might be translating in real time during a live call are finally given the dignity of time to draft their contributions. And this isn't just a feel-good policy, it mathematically results in vastly superior team output and much, much higher quality ideas. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, the Async Toolkit and consolidating your tools. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Won't async work just drag on forever? It's a super common fear that projects will just fade into ambiguity. To address that head-on, you absolutely have to implement a strict 48-hour limit. Here is how that 48-hour guardrail actually works in practice. It's this perfect balance of team autonomy and a really relentless bias for action. You give everyone a fair chance to review the docs, watch the videos, and drop their input. But if they don't submit their vote or feedback within that 48-hour window, the train leaves the station. The lead makes the call based on the data they already have. No exceptions. This completely kills analysis paralysis and keeps your project's momentum totally alive. Plus, to pull this off, you've got to get absolutely ruthless about where your information lives. Tooling fatigue is the sworn enemy of async discovery. When your team is juggling way too many apps, documentation quality just nosedives. You have to aggressively consolidate your tools and set up a singular source of truth, like one master page in Notion or Confluence. And the golden rule here is non-negotiable. If a design file or research note or summary isn't linked directly in that master document, it literally didn't happen. And just to clear up a major misconception, going async definitely doesn't mean you never talk to your coworkers again. Instead, you use a hybrid compromise timeline. You start with a tight 30-minute synchronous kickoff purely to align on the why and just build some social capital. Then, the team retreats to do the heavy, quiet work of the sprint. And once that's done, you reconvene for a quick 30-minute demo session to wrap up and celebrate the wins. You are reserving your precious Zoom time for actual human connection, not just basic information exchange. Making this transition is a massive cultural upgrade. It takes discipline, sure, but the strategic velocity you get in return, it is totally unmatched. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I've got a direct challenge for you. Audit your calendar right now. Take a look at your schedule for tomorrow. Which low-value status meeting are you going to cancel and replace with a deeply researched document or a quick 3-minute video? Make the commitment today to trade the whiteboard for a living, breathing narrative of your product. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and happy building.